have been the most patient one ever, as I fumbled with the most basic chores. I would tuck her in too tight or get the temperature on the formula wrong. It was just one mess after another, and that's after working a 10-hour shift. The only thing that I got right was putting her to sleep. I would tuck my hand behind her little head and shush her and sing, and she would go out like a light. Bam, down for the count. That one thing sort of made up for all my other mistakes. I have to thank my mom for the tip someday. It's an old song. It goes a little something like, "Oh, I, foof, my little one." Like a bolt of lightning from last one. You don't, but it's the best you got. It pays well, real well. I can bring all your guys and starting tomorrow. What do you say? I said the only thing that I could. I said yes. It was tough to come home that day. I had been surrounded by this ceaseless vitriol all afternoon. One of the guys had been crying in the porta potty. This was supposed to be a long-term gig, and now we were all on shaky ground. Whatever this new job entailed, it didn't exactly calm us down. But at least we could keep our heads up a little longer. I don't think I did a single thing right that evening. I forgot to wash my hands when I picked up my baby girl, getting her wispy hair a little dirty. I changed her diaper, but I couldn't get the thing to sit right, and I used way too much powder. It was just one thing after another. It wasn't until I sat down to watch the news that I finally got to do the one thing that I was good at, singing her to sleep. One verse and she was out. My wife joined me on the couch, speaking in a hushed voice. She was just as worried as me about the job, but I could tell that she was trying to stay positive. She asked all kinds of questions like what we were doing and for how long and with what people. And I didn't have an answer for any of it. Not unlike the talking heads on the TV. All I could say is that we had a time, a place, and a generous paycheck. "Just be careful," she said, giving me a kiss on the cheek. Doing tunnel work is rough for a number of reasons. In summer, you're melting away in the heat, and in autumn, you're knee-deep in rain. In winter, well, you don't do a lot of digging in the winter. The ground gets frozen and it can mess up the equipment. Depends on the job site, I guess. And we were nearing the end of the season. The last dig of the summer is the one that you finish just before you go on vacation, and my guys had been robbed of theirs. I knew of at least one guy who had to cut his trip to Tallahassee. He wouldn't shut up about it. It was better than having no job at all, but the disappointment was immeasurable. We had been promised stable work for years to come, and now we were fighting for scraps. The location turned out to be a construction site, not a dig site, mind you. There's a difference. The place was roughly the size of a football field, lined with a chain-link fence wrapped in yellow plastic. There were all kinds of construction tools lying around, seemingly abandoned. There was even a bulldozer. We waited for about an hour before someone showed up. There was this one guy with protective glasses and a hard hat, our supposed foreman. He seemed friendly enough, probably somebody a bit further down the career ladder. He came up to us and clapped his hands to get our attention. "Everyone feeling okay?" he asked, throwing his arms out. There was a murmur, but nobody was particularly enthusiastic about the whole thing. We weren't a construction crew. Then again, at that point, we had no idea what kind of crew we were supposed to be. "Oh, we're gonna go through all the details in a bit," he continued. "I just want to say that I know this isn't ideal. We didn't have a choice in the matter. That said, if this works out, we're gonna have a lot more work for you going forward. So let's get started, okay? That lifted our spirits a little. I saw a couple of nods and the hint of a smile. Maybe things would work out. And we walked into the site. He showed us this spot at the far end, right next to a jackhammer. There was a hole about 3 feet deep and 6 feet across. It looked like they had dug it out with shovels by hand. In the middle of the hole, there was a rock formation, like a white spike poking out of the ground. It was roughly the length of my arm. "This is what we found," the foreman said. "This particular mineral is uncommon in this part of the country. It's mainly used in pharmaceuticals." "What's it called?" "A pyrolith. It's used in something called Compound 5. It's life-saving stuff." He went on to explain the process. Essentially, this construction site was found to be littered with pyrolith minerals. The entire site needed to be dug out carefully, and the minerals had to be extracted as a whole. 2 guys were on standby to measure, catalog, and mark down each extracted sample down to the milligram. The tools were oddly specific. For example, we couldn't use jackhammers. We had to slowly work the base of the mineral with a portable water jet cutter. We couldn't touch the minerals without wearing rubber gloves, and we had to put out sprinklers near every active dig spot to suppress mineral dust. That, and there was a gas mask mandate. "It's important that we don't breathe this stuff in," he explained. "You don't want that." And by the end of our first day, we had dug up 5 of those spike things. They were all carefully placed in a vacuum container and sealed with a silicone spray. All that work for what equates to a suitcase of rocks. At the end of our shift, one of the guys had noticed something funny. And technically, we were right next door to our abandoned subway gig. Out through one door and in through another. It took some time to get used to the new setup, and we had to work with a lot of protective gear, and we kept getting soaked by the water jet and sprinklers. Working in that kind of environment gives you all kinds of uncomfortable aches, especially when you need to have a gas mask. The mix of heat and water kept fogging up the glass, sucking the salt from my skin and stinging my eyes. It was exhausting. We usually managed to get somewhere around 6 to 10 pyroliths a day, depending on the weather and how fast we could get to the base of the mineral. And they were all roughly 3 feet down, but a few of them were a bit smaller. Some were a bit bigger. There was one of them that was so tall that it poked out of the ground, but it had turned a metallic gray. And we sent a picture of it to the foreman, and he said that it was a no-go. "It's gone bad," he explained. "Cut it, leave it, it don't matter." Every night when I came home, I could barely stand. I fell asleep in the shower once, waking only when the water had turned cold. I'd remember to eat, and just because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. It was a strange feeling, and my wife could tell that I wasn't doing all right. I felt bad at not being able to keep up with the housework. But hey, at least I could sing my baby to sleep. That I could do. The fact that the site was so close to our old tunnel job was really strange. It was literally a stone's throw away, but cities can get like that sometimes. It might take 20 to 30 minutes in traffic to get from one street to another. But walking there at a brisk pace, it takes a couple of minutes. I hadn't even thought about it until they had pointed it out. The job was going to take weeks, maybe months, at the pace that we were going. We got the go-ahead to bring in some more guys, but it was hard to find people for a temp job at short notice. I managed to get a hold of 4 more in total, but trying to bring them up to speed was a hassle. I kept getting all these questions that I couldn't answer. For example, why couldn't we just dig up the whole site and then filter out the pylith later? And we could have done it all in about a week tops. And yeah, they were right, but we weren't allowed to do that. And what the hell is a pylith anyway? After a full week of working with this stuff, we were getting into a sort of rhythm. And we split up between surface testing, excavation, cutting, and transport. I was one of the cutters. I stood in a dirt pit with brown water up to my knees, trying not to get my fingers blown off as the drainage pump flopped around. Now I'm good at what I do, but we were working without proper routine and oversight. It was the Wild West. The first accident happened about 8 days into the job. One of the guys, I can't remember his name, got his face dust sprayed with pylith. The sprinklers had stopped working and he had to change his filter after a cut. All we saw was how he stepped away, took the mask off, and had a seizure. They had to carry him away and wash the dust off with a hose. He got back to work after a couple of days, but I don't think he was ever the same. There was something off about him. Not quite a 1,000-yard stare, but he would tilt his head up at strange angles every now and then, like he was looking at something behind the clouds. That, and he stopped complaining about his canceled Tallahassee trip. The second accident was one of the other cutters. He had just finished a smaller pylith spike when I saw him dip one of his legs down. It looked like he had just stepped wrong, but there was this look of genuine surprise on his face, and then we heard a pop like something exploding. And the guy screamed like a wounded animal, this repetitive shriek over and over as he clutched his leg. And when we got to him, I could see most of his foot and part of his leg had been crushed. Not just a sprain or something, but mangled. You could barely tell there was a foot at the end. It looked like cloth-covered meat. And when they carried him off, he was delirious. I heard him mumble as they shut the ambulance door. Breathing, breathing, breathing. If it had been any other job, we would have called it quits long ago. One workplace accident, it happens. But two on such short notice. No, that doesn't happen. Problem was, it felt like the bigwigs were only one step away from shutting us down all over again. They hounded us with that fact every chance they got. The foreman would slide a comment in about it when he could. Like at the end of every shift, I gave him an update on our progress. He always asked if things had gone smoothly, and whenever I said it did, he would just respond, "Good. Don't know how we could afford keeping this afloat if it didn't." Every damn time. So yeah, we had to make do. It was dirty work for dirty people, but what choice did we have? No one else was hiring, and getting the whole crew to another site on short notice was impossible. You don't spend that kind of money on a whim, and there was no standing contract lurking around the corner. These kinds of jobs take months of planning and contract negotiation. You'll be eating well into your savings long before you see a paycheck. And we kept having trouble with our gear. Not just because things would bend and break, I mean that's normal. Wear and tear is a part of the job. The problem is that we had no idea what kind of supports we were looking at, and most of our equipment was still at the tunnel site. We kept having trouble with the ground shifting. Sometimes when we dug out the pylith, the dirt would collapse. It wasn't bad enough to hurt anyone, but it was frustrating. We had a bunch of sandbags and supports on the old dig site, but we weren't allowed to get them. I kept hearing things around the site. The guy who had inhaled the dust complained about losing his sense of taste. The guy who had his foot crushed was admitted to psychiatric care. Another guy kept talking about how he found this black door at his apartment complex that he couldn't remember having ever seen before. Just a whole set of strange rumors. Every day felt like walking into a ghost story. Someone had something eerie to say. My first unusual experience was nowhere near as dramatic. I was working the water jet cutter when I accidentally had angled it downward. I left it on a little too long and I cut into the rocks surrounding the mineral. At first, I thought that I had hit a sewer line, but that would mean that it was inches from the surface. There was no way that was true, but the ground erupted with this foul black, like fish guts and mineral oil. I got out of there real quick, and the moment that I stepped out of the hole, the dirt collapsed around me, almost like the ground shook a little. On our third week, some people got sick. We thought it was a stomach bug going around, but we figured out the common denominator. Everyone who had gotten sick had regularly eaten dairy products for lunch or breakfast. Turns out on closer inspection that a lot of dairy spoiled around the dig site, like to the point where you could track it by looking at it. If we left a chocolate milk out in the open, the damn thing would be solid white mold before the end of the day. So yeah, no dairy on the dig site. I remember once in the break room, 6 of us were sitting around just chatting, and this one guy joins in with a yogurt. He knows we're not supposed to eat dairy, but he doesn't care anymore. He's staring straight ahead, shoveling spoonfuls into his mouth. I don't need to look to see that it's gone bad. I can smell it. We all can smell it. But he just sits there chewing it down like he doesn't have a care in the world. You can't eat that stuff. Someone mumbles. You'll get sick. The guy turns his head and licks the container clean. He doesn't even blink. You don't think what we're doing is sick? He asks. You think this is okay? It's a job, calm down. We're all sick in the head, the guy says, clutching his head. Parasites. He didn't stay long. After starting a third fight that same day, we had to let him go. And coming home every day was like coming up for air after a long drive. Everything felt brighter and I'd happily do whatever was asked of me. Changing diapers, no problem. Taking out the trash, wonderful. Anything and everything was better than staying another damn minute at the site. Thinking about going back the next day made me feel like a rock in the pit of my stomach. I'd look in the bathroom mirror trying to convince myself to get through one more day. But while I might not be the best at being a homebody, my wife rightfully pointed out that I was doing worse than usual. And she was right, I was. It wasn't a conscious thing, but once I noticed it, I couldn't ignore it. For example, I would put all the dishes into a vertical pile instead of the dishwasher. There was just something hypnotic about arranging them in a pattern. I would sometimes stand in front of the open refrigerator, holding my hands out like I was warming them by a fire. I got to the point where I was scared to be alone with my baby girl. What if I forgot her on the changing table? I couldn't live with myself if she got hurt. And still, we needed the money. Rent was going up, expenses were going up, and we needed a new set of tires for the car. We had already sold off our spare car. We couldn't afford to go without one. It was bad enough that we had to share one. I remember this one night as I was standing by my baby's crib. She was having trouble going back to sleep, and so I leaned in to sing. Problem is, I couldn't remember the words. I had never written them down or anything, so there was this sudden sense of loss in me, like I had forgotten something that was a part of me, instead of just a song. And my girl, she could tell. She was screaming a little heart out, begging me to remember. and I stood there opening and closing my mouth like a fish out of water, trying to explain that the words just weren't there. "I'm sorry," I said, shaking my head. "Oh, I'm so sorry, baby." When she fell asleep that night, it wasn't because she felt safe and cared for. It was exhaustion, just like me. By that time, coming to the site felt like walking into purgatory. One guy is off in the corner hurling his guts out. One guy is crying on a bench. One is lying flat on his back, looking up at the sky. Two guys don't even show up for work. And we barely made progress. What little we get is mostly from what we had started the previous shift. Around lunch, one guy was taking off his protective gear and going to town on a pilot like he was a sick cow with a salt lick. We had to pry him off and send him home. He laughed the whole way. By late afternoon, I was the only one working on this one particular pilot. The damn thing was big enough that I would have trouble lifting it by myself. I had to dig a little deeper than usual to get to the base, and I wasn't paying as much attention as I should have. By the time that I pulled down the water cutter, the cable dislodged something and the entire hole had collapsed, with me in it. I was buried under the dirt. Thank God for all that gear. I was lying face down in the dirt. I could breathe a little thanks to my gas mask in the porous ground, but it was like sucking air through a straw. I barely knew what was up or down. No matter which direction I pushed, it felt like something was pushing back. It's like the ground was trying to absorb me. I wasn't down for long, but in that moment, I felt this intense sense of dread. Not just a claustrophobic panic, but something else. I could imagine myself being stuck there, solidified as a relic in eternal stasis, like watching myself fossilize. All sense of time and passage of the world melted away. I could imagine the years flying by, leaving me helpless. If I had been down there 1,000 years, would I even want to get back up? And by the time they pulled me out, I was screaming. I don't remember, but I was. Apparently, I was begging for them to put me back in the ground. At the end of the day, I was sitting across from one of the machine operators. He was trying to have a glass of water, but he ended up throwing it out. Said it tasted funny. "We gotta do something about the equipment," he said. "We got tens of thousands of dollars still stuck in those tunnels. Hundreds of thousands, maybe. You think they're happy to leave it there? You honestly think they care? Well, I care. Hell, I'll take it off their hands if they ain't using it." "You're not suggesting that we steal from the company?" "What company?" he laughed. "Do you even know who we're working for? You know what we're doing. You see any workers' comp going out to the guys who say everything tastes like gasoline?" I shook my head. I didn't like it, but he was right. He took off his hard hat, dropping it on the table. "I say we get our fair share. Split it right down the middle," he said. "You in?" "I'm in." I told my wife that I'd be late the next day. 3 guys volunteered to help pick things up after our shift. There was a fair chance that we wouldn't get anything, but at that point we didn't care. Some of us were desperate to just get a big enough paycheck to cash out and make a run for it. We didn't want to be there anymore. None of us did. We drove down to the old tunnels and prepared ourselves. One guy brought a 2-wheeler, another brought flashlights, and one brought in walkie-talkies. We were going to turn the power on, but it was easy to get lost down there. Half the map wasn't finished. and most of the rooms were dead ends. You could get lost on the best of days, and we were barely functional. We made our way into the tunnels, keeping in touch as we went. It didn't take long for us to find some personal items, but there was quite a bit more to it. We could tell that others had been down there. There were a whole bunch of things that we hadn't seen before. Some of it I could barely understand. For example, there was this one drill that looked like an 8-foot-long syringe on a rail, leading to a hole in the wall. That's not what we were there for, but I couldn't help but raise my eyebrow at that. While the others found some gear, I decided to look a little further in. There was this one space that I had been working in just before we got shut down that I knew had a backpack full of seismic measuring equipment. It didn't take all that long for me to find my way back there, but the backpack was long gone. That figures. That thing alone was at least 25 grand. As I was about to head back to the others, I swept my flashlight across the black door. I don't remember that ever being there. I checked in with the others over the walkie, and they were still trying to dislodge one of the backup drills. I had some time, so I decided to check it out. I stepped inside just as the walkie crackled to life again. I got the power. Hold on to something. Seconds later, there was a hum and a crackle. I swept my flashlight across the room, seeing nothing out of the ordinary. It was a small cube-shaped room with the furthermost wall being pale white dirt. I was there with a light fixture overhead, so I searched the wall for a switch. I found it and turned it on, just to see if there was something that I had missed. The moment the light came on felt like staring into the sun. I hadn't realized how used I had gotten to the dark. That and the light seemed to be some kind of UV. It wasn't just bright, it was warm. The moment that it turned on, I saw the wall shift. Not by much, just a twitch. And dirt don't move like that though. The ground shook as people started calling out on the walkie. Somebody was screaming about a burst water pipe. Another one kept going. What the hell? Over and over, I could hear the sound of metal bending and breaking as support snapped, making the tunnels outside crumble. I could hear these blocks of stone, each one heavy enough to crush my car, falling like raindrops. The wall moved. The ground moved. I was standing still, watching solid concrete roll beneath me. The light flickered. A whole section of wall roiled like liquid, only to reveal this enormous glass-like structure. I stepped closer, watching these whirling colors slosh from left to right, up and down, like an organic membrane suspended in gelatin. Blue lines spreading out like the petals of a sunflower. As I step back and take in the whole picture, my breath gets stuck in my throat. The entire wall is the bottom half of an eye, a bright blue eye adjusting to the sudden bright light. I've never felt anything like in that moment. It's like the sky keeps falling over and over, like you're taking a step back even though you're standing still, making the world feel smaller with every breath. I could barely understand it. My legs felt so small that I couldn't feel myself walking. The power cut out. The bright blue pupil disappeared, leaving the outline of the shape lingering in my mind's eye. The sounds of the outside world faded away. I could hear the screaming in the walkie like a distant whisper. I could sense the rumble as the tunnels collapsed. I could feel the weight of the organic slosh as a mass of nerves far larger than me moved at breakneck speed, left to right, displacing the air. "It's coming down," somebody cried in the walkie. "Get the hell out, it's all coming down." But I couldn't move. I looked straight ahead into the darkness and I pushed my hand back towards the door. I couldn't open it. There was a blockage on the outside. The concrete ceiling was starting to crack. My mind pendulumed between sobering fear and a mind-gutting sense of hollowness. I was a father. I was nothing. I was being buried alive. I was pointless. All the while, I hear the surreal sound of something beyond my comprehension of scale starting to move, and I realize that I'm going to die down there. I'm going to be crushed or left to suffocate. And there's this little voice in the back of my head, whispering at me that there's a very real chance I don't come home tonight, that my baby girl isn't going to sleep well ever again, and I just break. I absolutely break. I slam my body against the door, I scream and shout and beat my fists on the metal sheeting. I step back and brace myself, throwing my weight at it, but it doesn't even budge. The voices on the walkie aren't even saying words anymore, having devolved into a panicked screeching. I step away from the door towards the eye. I fumble in the dark, picking up a fistful of concrete to use as a weapon. I move closer, ready to plunge my fist into the surface of the eye when I notice something. I'm stepping in liquid. I didn't hear a water pipe burst, not in here. I fumble for my flashlight. I barely manage to pick it up as my hands keep failing me. But as I turn it on, I realize that there's a thin layer of water lining the floor. An oily kind of salt water. And looking up at the eye, I see that it's leaking at the edges. Tears, maybe. Something in me clicks. The rapid eye movement, the sudden sense of panic and collapse. It dawns on me that I've seen this before. I've seen it a dozen times. It's just like when my baby girl wakes up in the middle of the night looking for her papa. That's all that it is. And I think about that moment when I was buried at the dig site with that sense of the world passing me by. I wouldn't want to wake from that. I wouldn't want to know which of my friends were dead or alive, which family members made it. I wouldn't want to know just how alone I really was. I would rather stay a fossil. Maybe that was it. Maybe that was it the whole time. Maybe we had been cleaning the scalp of something having a really, really bad dream. I turned off my flashlight and stepped a little closer. I could feel this thrumming movement coming from the membrane as nerves contracted, pushing out bucket after bucket of liquid. Meanwhile, I'm closing my eyes and thinking about an imaginary hand placed behind a tender head, fussing about going to sleep. Wispy hair getting caught between my fingers. At that moment, the words returned to me. The lullaby. With a shaky voice, I sing them. A voice in the dark, hoping something impossible can hear me and find comfort. Oh, I, foof, my little one. I sing it again and again and again. I'm imagining that little bundle in my arms and how it settles into a rhythm. How our breathing steadies with mine. A little hand wrapping around my finger and then letting go as the dreams take hold. And after a while, I realize the wall has stopped moving. It's just white dirt. Nothing is moving, collapsing, or breaking. It's just me in a dark room and my workmates trying to move a boulder outside the door. Something's gone back to sleep. When we got out, things had gone completely to shit. Car alarms were going off, streetlights had died, fire hydrants were pouring into the street. Waiting for us just outside were 2 patrol vehicles, ready to ask us some serious and uncomfortable questions. The whole ordeal was categorized as a localized seismic event. The company decided not to press any charges, and they just had us trespassed, but even that would eventually be overturned. You see, they still needed somebody to work the dig site. There were pylith to cut, and there was nobody around willing to do it. And honestly, who was more experienced working with this stuff than me and my crew? We had started to get the hang of it. We could make up our own rules. And now that I had an idea of what we were dealing with, I could do it in a way that wouldn't get us all killed. So yeah, we got back to work. I've been doing pylith digs for years now. We figured out a good routine and procedure, allowing us to rotate crew in a way that doesn't get us sent to the hospital. I got about 30 guys working with me. There's not a lot of demand for it, but what demand there is pays very well. I don't think you'll find any Craigslist postings for pylith diggers anytime soon, but we're out there. Sometimes it just looks like a construction site. Sometimes they don't bother trying to hide it. People see a jackhammer and they roll their eyes, hoping that we won't stick around for long. My girl isn't a baby anymore, but in another sense of the word, she absolutely is. I've managed to scrape together a pretty good life for her. I work weekdays along with every second and third weekend of the month, but I get the full first week of the month completely off. Just 2 paid vacation weeks a year though. But the hourly rates are just, I'll admit, I'm a bit spoiled. I could sign off on a new pool and it wouldn't break our budget. But I feel like I had to take a moment to look back at it all. Not just because it was a monumental day of my life, but because it changed something in me. I may be the smallest, most insignificant thing in whatever world this is, but I'm still here. I can still do something. And if I can do that one goddamn thing right, is that not enough reason to do it? I'm thinking, whenever I'm gray and gone, is my girl gonna remember the fancy vacations and the new car smell of our family Hyundai? Or is she gonna remember the times that I sung her to sleep? I don't need an answer. I know it. I feel it. And somewhere deep underground, there is something that feels the same.